welcome to the third day of Art Mumbai. I hope everyone's been here for a couple of days. I hope you've had a chance to walk around, take a look, not just at the exhibitor booths, which are fantastic, and with galleries all around the world, but I hope you've had a chance to be part of some of the other programming as well and just enjoy the space. This has been a real labor of love for us, this fair. So now in our third edition, we hope to expand it out and involve as many of you as possible. As I've said before, this is very much our fair to share. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank the Kiran Nathar Museum of Art, without whose support it would have been impossible for us to build this speaker panel and have all of you here. And I'm very excited about this morning's panel, actually, because we've talked so much about design, architecture, and art melding into our everyday thinking and our cultural consciousness. So I think what's exciting about this panel this morning is it explores a really fascinating question, which is, how is it and why do certain architectural forms, certain design ideology or practice adapt and feel completely local and almost indigenous when introduced into new regions, while others sometimes remain foreign to that space? And we're going to actually do this through almost 3 case studies, if you will. So we have Mumbai, Dhaka, and Asmara as case studies, and we'll examine how cities that serve as cultural crossroads on many fronts are able to indigenize architectural and design styles. We have an extraordinary panel joining us today. We have Sean Anderson, who is an associate professor at Cornell University and formerly the associate curator of architecture and design at MoMA in New York. He curated groundbreaking exhibitions, including Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America, which was MoMA's first exhibition ever to highlight the work of African American and African diasporic architects that they did a review of. He's a fellow of the American Academy in Rome. He's taught and practiced architecture across Afghanistan, India, Sri Lanka, Morocco, and the UAE. And his scholarship is focused on modern architecture in colonial and post-colonial contexts. So perfect for us today. Joining him is Sundaram Tagore. He's an art historian, a gallerist, and an award-winning filmmaker, and someone that I've known, now for almost 25 years, and has always been at the leading edge of South Asian and more expansive art practices. Sundaram is a descendant of the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, who is certainly one of the most important figures in our cultural history. And he's dedicated his career to fostering a dialogue between the East and the West. His eponymous galleries have become vital spaces for multicultural and multidisciplinary exchange. And prior to establishing his own gallery, Sundaram served as a director at the Pace Wildenstein Gallery in New York, and his expertise throughout the years has been sought by institutions including the National Gallery of Modern Art in New Delhi, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the United Nations. We also have Atul Kumar with us, our local expert. He is the founder and trustee of the Art Deco Mumbai Trust, which is an extraordinary organization that he has built. His tireless work has been instrumental in preserving and documenting Mumbai's extraordinary Art Deco heritage. And under his leadership, the Trust has cataloged over 1,500 Art Deco buildings across the city. His advocacy was actually pivotal in Mumbai's successful UNESCO World Heritage nomination and assignment. And I'm happy to say that several years ago, Saffron Art actually did an auction where some of the proceeds went to support that. And we're so happy to be able to have been part of it in some small way. He continues to champion heritage conservation globally as a board member of the International Coalition of Art Deco Societies, where he chairs their preservation committee. And last but not least, we have Tinaz Nooshian, the creative director of Art Deco Alive, which is what's brought us all here together today for this panel. And this is an extraordinary festival. It's bringing together Mumbai and Miami's stunning Art Deco heritage in one incredible celebration happening all over this city. I mean, it's an enormous undertaking. And as you have the time, I would highly encourage you to go and visit these sites. It's almost like a mini Art Deco biennial of its own or something. You know, it's really taken over the city. And Tinaz in particular, I want to talk about her. She's broken barriers and as Midday's first woman editor and transformed it into one of India's top 10 English daily publications. It's certainly proof that she knows how to turn a vision into reality. When she's not curating festivals or reshaping newsrooms, you'll find her championing India's rich cultural tapestry through the Parsi Artistry Salon, where Zoroastrian heritage and indigenous textiles very much take center stage. Today, they're going to unpack how cities absorb, transform, and ultimately claim architectural and design forms as their own, turning the formal and foreign into the familiar. So please join me in welcoming these extraordinary speakers, and I hope you enjoy this morning's panel.
Thank you, Meenal, for that warm introduction. Meenal's been extremely supportive from the get-go. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at Art Mumbai, representing Art Deco Alive. It's a cross-continental cultural festival that celebrates 100 years of the 1925 Paris Exposition, massive design fair that gave Art Deco movement of design its identity. Our public-facing festival, which is currently ongoing across Art Deco neighborhoods of Bombay and continues till November 25th, celebrates two vibrant tropical cities with a shared architectural heritage, Miami and Mumbai. They happen to be two cities that have the largest surviving Art Deco structures anywhere in the world. At the center of our festival is our centenary museum exhibition called Ocean Drive to Marine Drive, Mapping a Century of Deco, which we're co-presenting with the Dr. Bhaldaji Lad Museum in Bhaikala, with the Miami Design Preservation League and the Art Deco Mumbai Trust as knowledge partners. Please come visit. It's on every day, doing a bit of plugging, but it's really worth it. 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. every day except for Wednesdays. Do visit. The exhibition creatively maps Art Deco across Mumbai and Miami, relying on academic research, rich multimedia, archival photographs, oral narratives, and a beautiful collection of vintage 1920s, 30s furniture and precious Art Deco artifacts that we have curated from homes and private collections. And now I'd like to call Smriti Kanodia, founder of Art Deco Alive, to share the journey of the festival. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. What a fitting setting it is to be here today at Mumbai's premier art fair. Minal Vazirani was our advisor when we did Time Out over 20 years ago, and her love for the city and passion for the arts is an embodiment of what we see here today. Congratulations to you and Dinesh, Minal, on your labor of love. It's in its third edition, Art Mumbai, and it's lovely to see the number of people that are congregating, not just from Mumbai, but all over the world. And you've really amalgamated the city in a beautiful way. Art Deco Alive was born out of an idea of cohesive collaboration for spotlighting our Art Deco heritage across four most deco cities with the largest number of buildings in Mumbai and Miami, for celebrating the 100 years of the Art Deco movement, which started in 1925 in Paris. A few years ago, when my husband Nishant and I were walking along Miami's Ocean Drive, I was struck by how much it felt like home, and reminded me of Mumbai's Marine Drive and of Shivaji Park, where we lived when I got married. The same sweeping curves, deco geometry, and warm sea breeze. In a conversation with my dear friends and co-founders, Salma Merchant Rahmatullah, and Gayatri Hingorani Diwan, who are here today all the way from Miami with a beautiful group of 20 ladies who've come to support us from Ocean Drive. So they were at our show in Miami and have actually come down to be with us this week in Mumbai. We realized how deeply connected our two cities are through design and spirit. The love for color, a masaledar mix of cultures, the sun, and a positive attitude. We had a successful edition in Miami last month with the mayor of Miami inaugurating it. Art Deco Alive has now officially been in Mumbai for about 10 days and continues till the 25th of November. It was inaugurated by Sri Ashish Shelarji and Sri Bhushan Gagrani ji. In their powerful address, Shelarji shared a vision that this initiative will one day be recognized as a cultural bridge from Mumbai to Miami through Maharashtra, a movement that places India's cultural heritage proudly on the global map. The citywide festival, from Marine Drive to Dadar to Juhu, with over 80 collaborators and partners, has already had over 5,000 people visiting the shows, touching Art Deco through walking tours, sketching tours, several talks, restaurants reintroducing timeless dishes. In fact, if you're free on this weekend, please go to Churchgate Street. We have all the restaurants there doing special throwback menus. Learn deco lettering and much more in the last few days, which have been a great hit, and we are blessed that it's been sold out. Art Deco is an attitude of resilience and of positivity, of straight simplicity and a little curve. Through storytelling and meaningful collaborations, we aim to preserve the best of our city while embracing the spirit of optimism and growth. And before I conclude, I'd like to leave some food for thought. How do we ensure this legacy of Art Deco stays alive, not just in photographs, but in our daily lives? I urge you all to share your stories. If you grew up in going to the Eros cinema, or if your neighbor's staircase still has those deco railings, talk about it. Photograph it, post it, write it, and tell your kids. Through the language of design, let's create, let's collaborate. Your memories are Mumbai's most powerful heritage brochure. So let's keep Mumbai's Art Deco not just standing, but dancing, the Lavani and the swing. Because this city, our city, deserves nothing less. Thank you for your time and your support in making Art Deco come alive. Thank you.
Today's discussion on the localizing of global architectural styles, especially cities that are migrant hotspots, trade hubs, or colonial outposts, dovetails beautifully with the centenary year of the Art Deco style, which traveled right across the world, from Shanghai on one end to New York on the other, with interesting stops along the way, including Havana and Tehran. I'd now like to invite Sundaram Tagore, Atul Kumar, and Sean Anderson in that order to share their research and insights on Dhaka, Mumbai, and Asmara, respectively, all incredibly fascinating crucibles for the modernist architectural styles to find a fresh identity and new context.
Wonderful to be back here in Mumbai, my favorite city, and to talk about architecture, my favorite topic. So let's move this. Yeah, I just wanted to start with this photograph of Louis Kahn's Tiger City. And the actual name of this city complex, a mini city complex, is called Sher-e Banglanagar, the city of the tiger of Bengal. And it came out of the freedom fighter Suhrawardi. And that's how this complex was named. Now, I landed up here in 1986, and I got a travel grant from my university to go and study this building that Louis Kahn had designed 10,000 miles away from Philadelphia, where he was working and where he lived. He was born an Estonian, and he moved to the US when he was 3 years of age. First thing that came to my mind was, how was he able to build something like this? It took 23 years, 2,000 people worked on it every day, except during the war. When the Bangladeshi Liberation War, there was a period, there was an hiatus. But at that point, the Indian army occupied these ruins. And they were using this as a shelter. Other than that, it really took 23 years, 2,000 people worked on it. It's essentially like the pyramids. You're building the Taj Mahal, for instance. And so in order to build this structure, the kind of buildings and kind of architecture that Louis Kahn wanted to build was a building that he felt would be of great gravity, monumentality, and great weight, essentially architecture masonry. And one of the reasons he wanted to build architecture of that sort, as opposed to corporate architecture of glass and steel, which he really called it the square footage architecture. He didn't care about that. Is the defining factor in his architecture was light, and he called it silence and light. That was very, very important to him. How do you manipulate light? And I'll show you them. For instance, when you have these cutouts, the cutouts are partly replicating to a certain extent the kind of architecture that you see in Mughal architecture. We have the concave versions. Oh, sorry. Yeah, when I'm moving way up, thank you. So these cutouts, he had 50 or so different kind of geometrical shapes cut out. And these cutouts were windows, not so much a window for a building, but windows for the city talking to the other parts of the inhabitants of the people of the city. And so in order to create a direct relationship with Mughal architecture, because the clients were the Islamic country of Pakistan, West Pakistan first, and then it became Bangladesh, as you know. And so he wanted to bring in this element of Mughal architecture in this concrete form, the octagonal form. And the concrete, you can see the marble inlay. What do you have in Mughal architecture? The marble inlays. Then the brick plaza. He's bringing in all kind of association with Mughal and Indo-Islamic architecture. How does this work? Could we move it to the next one? Okay, thank you. So this octagonal shape form that you see here, this is in a way an homage to Le Corbusier. He loved Le Corbusier. He had been to Chandigarh. He had studied the city complex, and he admired him deeply. In fact, at some point, he had written that he wrote in his book that I live in a beautiful city called Le Corbusier. So he greatly admired him. And so some of these association that he's bringing in, both in a modernist way and a vernacular terms. And the can we move to the next one? So he's surrounded this Capitol complex, the gray octagonal form Capitol complex, which is the parliament, with this lake and a crescent-shaped lake. Again, crescent shape, it has a direct relationship with Islam. And but he's not trying to bring in so much of a symbology, but more an association with the local architecture and the local topography. And so can we move to the next one? How about the next one? This building is incredibly photogenic. No matter which angle do you look at it, you can take some beautiful photographs. Can we move to the next one? Okay. When you see the interior, he by manipulating light, how he manipulated light was essentially he created an extra skin, an extra wall and by the cutouts, when the light penetrated the building, the light was really diffused, and you walk through the space as if you're floating. It's incredible. So within the interior spaces, he's referring to Piranesi. He had a drawing of Piranesi above his own table. And he created this Piranesian dreams where sort of bridges connecting these different structures, and then the clear story, the light flooding in, and then the oculus, this comes directly from the Pantheon. So he's bringing in this Roman architecture with Islamic architecture and then vernacular local Bengali architecture, and he's merging all three together. Can we move to the next one? Okay, so let's move to the next one, please. Just give you some views and in order to contextualize it. Okay, next, let's move to the next one. You can see these Piranesian bridges that he has created. It is unbelievable. 67% of this complex, this parliamentary complex, is actually devoted for aesthetic purpose. Can we move to the next one? So when I got there, this had pride in the 70s. It had become a symbol for Bangladeshi freedom, and it had become the beating heart of the government. But by the time I got there in 1986, President Ershad was ruling the place, and he was a dictator at that time, and therefore he had nothing to do with this parliament in any shape or form. So I had befriended a PWD architect, and who had given me a free rein to walk around this complex. So it was stunning. I got to see it without any of the human beings there. And can we move to the next one? So when you enter into this complex, it's very hard to figure out how to get out. And that was also very deliberate because assassination was a real thing in this part of the world, in this complex. People were killed. And so they wanted to, for security reason, unless you lived in that complex and you worked there every day, people, once you walked in, you didn't know how to get out. You had to find ways. And I had asked Henry Wilcox, the project architect, and he said it was a very deliberate way because the government wanted it to be built that way. Can we move to the next one? Okay. So within the octagonal form, the architectural, this parliament that you see, there were red brick ministers' quarters. So if you can imagine a neck, and the necklace was a coral red brick. And these brick forms were, again, both in association with the subcontinent and also Roman architecture. He loved brick architecture, and that's what he wanted to sort of present in Bangladesh. And one reason was it was a local material that he could use, and it was it could be created. And he taught the people how to make these bricks, the kind of size and shape and coloration you wanted. And that way it could be produced in a massive context. in addition, it'd be all labor intensive. And he was very adamant that most of the people who got to work here had to learn masonry and how to learn the craftsmanship of building. So as people were working here for years, for decades, and he became a recruiting center later. So people would come here and recruit them, and then they send them to Dubai and send them to Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. The second and the third generation of these kids, they started building Singapore and other places. That story hasn't been told yet, and that's a fascinating story. Someone will write about it actually in the near future. Can we move to the next one? So you can see it's built in a way that visually, when you're walking through, this is part of the porte cochere. When you drive in, and this is where you get off, and there's a connecting moat, and they'll connect you directly into the parliament. So everywhere it's so photogenic, and the lake is surrounding it, and it's reflected on the lake, and it's a stunning form that is created. So originally he was giving 200 acres of land. He immediately said it was inadequate. Then he asked for more. They gave him 2,000, and then it got expanded into 4,000 acres of land. He was able to build 2,000 acres, and then the previous Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, wanted to complete the other 2,000 acres of land. That's been completely designed. But at the moment, because of political reason, they're unable to complete that, Okay, can you move to the next one? One more interior shots, and next one, please. And yeah, next one. This is in the top floor, and this is what you see. Look, and this is where the diffuse light comes from. There's a layers of actually walls and the cutouts, these enormous cutouts, and when the light penetrates in, you get this very soft, very beautiful light. And that manipulation light is, I think, Louis Kahn's really forte. Okay, next one, please. This is within the parliamentary chambers. And next one. And the parabolic roof, they had a lot of difficulty in building the roof. They waited till the very last minute, and then they were able to build that. And okay, we'll continue our conversation, and thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be talking about the localization of Art Deco in Mumbai. I think we're all well aware of how international it is as a style, how global it is, and it's in Miami and it's in New York and it's also in Shanghai and Cuba. But it's great to be on a forum where I can actually present the significance of this style and particularly its local adaptation that's taken place in Bombay. The important thing for me to acknowledge in the beginning is that this style was built by Indian architects for India, for the citizens of Mumbai. I'm going to give you names we're all very familiar with, George Whitted, and we've all heard of Charles Frederick Stevens. But how about Master Satya and Bhuta, the person who designed large parts of Fort, Firosha Mehta Road, Marine Drive, G.B. Matre, who designed Car Fuel, the petrol pump, Empress Court at the Oval Maidan, and then, of course, Marathe and Kulkarni, who designed Shivaji Park and Brahma Devi. And lastly, a very fine young lady who graduated from the J.J. College of Art, as it was called at that time in 1936, Perrin Mistry. These were the forefront of a movement that designed a new Bombay, a modern Bombay. In 2018, UNESCO inscribed Bombay as a World Heritage Site, and it included the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensembles. This encompasses a large part of Marine Drive, Churchgate, Fort, and extends up to Regal Cinema. The style, in essence, while Western in Western in design, was actually an example of an Indian spirit that was reflected through all the architecture that I'm going to show you very quickly now. As you know, it's a very dynamic style. It's very adaptable. It's been used by designers to interpret and design everything from jewelry, furniture, architecture, of course, fashion, textiles, and even cinematic representation. But when you see what these architects from the JJ School of Architecture did, you'll be amazed at how they've melded an international style with a local sensibility. This is the Cotton Exchange building, built, I think, by doctor in 1938. No, I'm sorry, Sykes, Padkar, and Devecha in 1938. And this building was the headquarters of the Cotton Exchange at that time. You can see the bas relief work, which is really all about storytelling. It's a representation of the trade. It's showing you people dressed in Indian clothing, loading bales of cotton on a truck. And this bas relief extends throughout the whole front facade of the building. It's also represented here in these murals, which are life size. The ones on the two on the left are New India Assurance building at Fort. This relief work is done by N.G. Pansare, and the building is done by Master Sathe Bhuta. You can see, again, classic Indian representation. The man is dressed in a dhoti. The woman is carrying a bale of hay or cotton. And there is also in the second image some representation of industrialization and design. The last picture is done by Shivaik Chavda on the onlooker building at Firozshah Mehta Road. And you can see a fairly militant woman represented over there, carrying two flags of Swaraj in each hand with a girdle around her waist. The architects also melded the style with religious symbolism. And, it was a cosmopolitan Bombay where it was okay to represent religious identity in the architecture of your building with melding it within Art Deco. So on the left, you have a Lamasu, which is at the Agyari at Marine Lines, and you can see how clean, bold, and assertively it's been designed. And on the right, you have Madina Manzil, which is a very, very fine example of Islamic iconography. You can see the star, you can see the crescent, and of course the top pediment of the building is a classic stepped profile, which is very popular as a representation in Art Deco. Oops, can I get to the next one, please? Yeah, so here, just to highlight again, representation of identity in a local manner is this classic sunburst, which is again a very popular Art Deco motif, but nestled within it is the swastik sign. And below that, you have two lamps or diyas, which again are typically associated with Hindu mythology and prayer. On the right, you can see Lorry House, which has a cross, again representing another community. And if you look at the neighborhoods, Hira Mahal is in Vadala, Lorry House is in Dadar. The other two buildings I showed you were in Fort or in Marine Lines. So it was across the length and the breadth of the city. It also included lettering scripts, which were represented in the Art Deco style. What I like here is that it's in Gujarati, it's in Devanagari, it's in Urdu, and it's again across neighborhoods. The Devanagari representation of that name is beautifully executed in red, and Beg Ismail Muhammad School at Muhammad Ali Road off the JJ flyover still has its name in the Urdu font. And then, of course, I would have liked to show you on the left a picture of the building called Empress Court, which reveals our fascination with colonial names and an aspiration to be very friendly with the British because of the compulsions of trade. But, oops, sorry. The image on the right, of course, is Bharatiya Bhavan, and you can see the transition from a Western aspiration to representing the country and the kind of names and lettering that were emerging at that time. Very quickly, I'd just like to end with uh, the fact that, we often hear the statement that Mumbai has the second largest collection of Art Deco buildings in the world. And I'd like to just leave you with the thought that having documented 1,528, the next time you hear that in conversation, please stand up and say that we have arguably one of the largest collections in the world. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. And I wanted to thank Smiti in particular because I moved to Bombay almost a year ago now. And she was one of the first persons I was introduced to, almost serendipitously and by accident. And it was with that conversation that I knew that in October or even November of this year, I might be talking about a part of my history and a part of my research that has been very much ongoing while I circulated around the world, not only as an architect, but also as a curator in particular. So it's a great pleasure, Smiti, and a great honor to be here with you today. So I wanted to begin with a story because around 25 years ago, I was living in India. I was working for Doshiji in Ahmedabad, teaching at SEPT, hanging out in Alibag with Bajoy before he became a superstar. And I used to walk around Mumbai quite a bit, sketching, taking pictures, truly trying to absorb and think about what it meant to be in a city in which style, aesthetics, a way of life was truly being built around you and around me at the time, and thinking about also modernist architecture and the role of modernism, in particular in India and South Asia, and of course around the world. So 25 years ago, I moved from Bombay, from India to Los Angeles, where I was doing my PhD in art history, but thinking about architecture and modernism. So I say all of this because it's now come full circle to come back to Mumbai this year, to work as a curator, to work with artists, and now also to talk about architecture. So it's great privilege, and thank you, Smiti, for allowing me to talk about this. Today I'm going to talk about Asmara, Eritrea. Asmara was the capital of, in fact, the Italian colonial empire, which many people don't realize that Italy had a number of colonies in Northeast and North Africa, Libya, Asmara and Eritrea, Somalia, and eventually Ethiopia. And Eritrea, though, was their first colony, and it was called La Colonia Primogenita, the firstborn colony. And with that came architects and architecture and artists to transform what had hitherto been a space kind of in the imagination as an empty landscape. And they began by building cities like Asmara, which I'll share in a moment. This began in 1890, but by the 1920s, when the fascist party came to power in 1922, what you see is a transformation not only in aesthetics, but also a transformation in the ways in which architecture and art began to flourish in the colonial space, especially in the Italian colonial space. Of course, this was happening across the continent of Africa, French, Portuguese, German, and so forth. But in the Italian context in particular, the relay or the reciprocity between the colonial space and the Italian space was so great that you found that architects like Giuseppe Terragni on the left here, Aldoberto Libra, were thinking not only that the architecture that they were making in Italy, in the Italian context, could be translated then in the colonial context. So much of my work over these years has been to think about what this relay means, not only for architecture, but also for art in particular. So I wanted to begin today just by looking at these two examples, which were probably considered the most important examples of what was called rational architecture. On the left is Giuseppe Terragni's Casa del Fascio, recently photographed by the great Dayanita Singh. And on the right is the EUR, which is was to be the Universal Exposition of Rome in 1942, which never happened. Both of these kind of complexes were fully embedded within a politics of the day, that modernist aesthetics and power could be allied to create a new form of architecture and eventually art as well. So those of you who have been to Rome, for instance, you will see the EUR, that cubic building that you see at the bottom left quite often, which is now operated and owned by Fendi, ironically enough. And if you've gone to Como, you will see the Casa del Fascio, which is near the lake. These buildings, though, were fully embedded in an oppressive politics and a fascist politics, but was also overlaid with this notion that architecture and design could transform the body, could transform the mind, and it could transform people. So architecture was progressive. It was a idea of a progressive modern body, social body. We can keep going. So it's the next image, please. Maybe. Good. So Italy was one of the last European powers to have colonies and possessions outside of peninsular Italy. So I wanted to just share two examples, one on the top on the right, which is the gate to Mogadishu in Somalia. And on the bottom was a cinema built in the island of Rhodes, the Dodecanese Islands in Greece. These were both possessions and colonial spaces of Italy, and with them came an architecture and an art form that was very much allied then with this idea of the progressive human, the modern human, as it were, the modern Italian human. Ironically, though, or not, that notion of progress was also linked to race. And there were simultaneously huge amount of literature being drawn up, not only in Italy, but around the world, around this idea that architecture and art could then transform what might be considered the indigenous space, the non-European space, or the non-Western space. So you have a page here from a magazine, an architecture magazine in the 30s, probably the most prominent architecture and art magazine in Italy at the time. And the writer is Carlo Enrico Rava. He and his brother were prominent architects in the colonies, writing about the fact that this form of architecture that you see at the top, this cubic, rectangular, orthogonal architecture, organized through an idea of ancient Rome, could then transform what was seen as, in this term, Barbary, the barbaric, which was circular forms made out of earth, mud, and so forth. So a local, say, indigenous form of architecture. This kind of rhetoric, though, was being used and deployed across media, mostly magazines, but also films, to show that a modern architecture, a modern colonial architecture, could then transform the idea of the indigenous space. And it's certainly fueled with racist and eugenics. Next image, please. So I spent quite a bit of time then walking, driving, finding spaces throughout the former Eritrean and Italian Empire. These are photographs of mine in the agricultural villages of central Libya. And they were built, of course, with not only an idea that the building itself could transform the people who operated there or lived there, but under Mussolini, after 1922, the displacement of poor southern Italians were forcibly brought to places like this in order to create new agricultural forms, but also to become more modern vis-a-vis the architecture. Next slide, please. And so you have spaces like this. This is in Benghazi before, of course, all of the devastations of 2006. On the left is a view of the main axis of downtown Benghazi. It could be Miami. It could be even Naples in Italy. And on the right is my photograph from that same axis looking back. Next image, please. 2005. Yeah. So I bring you then to Asmara, the kind of core argument, and then I think probably a good, as you said, Smriti, a case study, or, you said a case study for today. And it's the place where I spent most of my time. In Asmara, there were over 180 modernist buildings built from the 1890 until 1941. So in 50 years, you have not only an arc of governance, an arc of politics, an arc of sociality, an arc of ideas about what it meant to be a modern person or a modern Italian, but you also have 50 years of architecture being built according to moments of interest and style, as it were. So in this image, you have the cathedral, the main cathedral, built in around 1910 on the left in the background. You have the first modern mosque built on the right, which is the minaret there from 1922. And in the foreground is a building that I wrote about quite extensively, which was the Enda Mariam Cathedral. This is an Orthodox Eritrean cathedral. This is the gate to that cathedral. It is a fascist building, by and large, built in 1938 by a very young architect. And what you see here is this striped form of brick and stone, these linear forms that you see at the base. Then you have the bell towers here, which are looking a little bit more Italian, if you will. And then the rooftops, which are thatched. And they're thatched every 2 years by women who practice the idea of thatching the roof. So just in this one building, you have a multitude of ideas and forms and times coming together to make an architecture that is very specific to Eritrea and to Asmara. And that's what makes the city so fascinating. Next slide, please. And I couldn't help but include some Art Deco buildings in this talk, just to give you a sense that everywhere you walk in this relatively small city, you have extraordinary villas like you see on the right, which was a government villa made for an Italian citizen. And on the left was an actual housing and commercial space built for Eritreans by an Italian architect. What's so intriguing, too, about Eritrea is that from 1922 until 1938, unlike most colonies on the continent of Africa, Eritreans and Italians could collaborate and work and live together. And it was only after 1938, when the so-called race laws were passed, that the cities started to be reorganized around these lines. So this fusion of forms was not only aesthetic, but it was also quite social in the ways in which the city started to build itself and represent itself. Next slide, please. And I couldn't also help include two facades of my two favorite cinemas in Asmara, because the first Indian film I saw was at the Regal Cinema here many, many years ago. And these extraordinary cinemas, there were 8 built in a town of 50,000, mainly for showing propaganda, Italian propaganda films, but also Bertolucci and so forth over time. So these cinemas became spaces of the imagination. They became spaces of thinking about this distant land that was in full control of the nation, but also a space of imagination. And so to think about architecture as more than the building, more than the way it's seen, but also experienced. And so the cinema, for me, has been always not just about maybe the film that was shown there, but how it becomes a space of projection, literally and figuratively, and how even in the space of the cinema, the notion of the modern person could evolve and be embedded. Next, and just to give you a sense, this is the interior bar of one of the other cinemas, the Cinema Odeon. And these spaces still exist today. They are very much popular. This is where you get a great coffee, a cappuccino, if you will, before you go and see, or after you go and see a film. These are social spaces. And then last slide, please. And then lastly, I just wanted to include probably one of the most photographed buildings, which is the Fiat Tagore building. Again, designed by a very young architect who was around 28 at the time that he made this building. He was both an engineer and an architect. And there are a lot of stories about this building. When I was living in Asmara, it was a disco. Prior to that, it was the actual service station for vehicles. I bring this forward because it is not only a monument now, a monument to a moment in time, but it's a monument to not only the creativity of the architects and the designers who are working here and everywhere, but this idea that architecture is more than itself. Architecture speaks to large groups of people, whether we like it or not, and yet it is also embedded in systems of power, in systems of division, in systems of the ways in which we see ourselves. And we can't discount the violence that has happened in order to create these. And at the same time, we can't discount the beauty of them as well. So with that, I want to thank you, and I look forward to our conversation.
So I'm going to start with Sundaram and Atul because I think that I saw several points of convergence in what Louis Kahn was trying to do and what Deco's pioneering architects in Bombay were also trying to do at the turn of the century. So Kahn was obviously segueing universalism and regionalism and mixing up modernist principles of monumental geometry and that poured in concrete. But he was mixing it up with the use of local marble, which is what we saw in the inlay work that you pointed out. And that's a long tradition in Southeast Asian Islamic culture. And we see this cultural negotiation in Mumbai too, Atul, especially in the decorative elements on the facades. So some stunning examples there in your presentation. Lakshmi Nivas, the lotus ornamentation, Shivaji Park, so many buildings of Muhammad Ali Road which get completely overlooked. Native lettering in Matunga, Ville Parle. We're doing a walk there tomorrow. Not many people associate Ville Parle East with Deco, and of course Pansare's stunning bas reliefs at New India Assurance. So, interestingly, Victorian Gothic didn't lend itself to the Indian flourishes that Deco accommodated so beautifully while still retaining its contemporary appeal. So there's all of this, and then you also see this sense of timelessness, which is happening because of the play of air and light. In the case of Kahn, like Sundaram pointed out, where the you see the structural columns as light wells, and in Bombay, the cubist vents and circular balconies for cross ventilation. So, how do you see this goal to serve the local needs of the population in the context of that time, but also in a sense to transcend to foreverness, a timelessness? You want to take that?
Yeah, okay. So when Louis Khan came to India, that was in 1961, he was introduced to India by Balkrishna Doshi. They were good friends. And he was exposed to Indian mythology, history, and through conversation. And then he was taken to sites like Mount Abu. He went to see local, because he would travel to Dhaka, he would travel through Calcutta. Then he went to Chandigarh. He studied Delhi, Lachin's Delhi. So he was exposed to Indian mythology, Indian architecture, Indian art. Then by the time he got to 1963, he was commissioned to do Dhaka. He was very excited. He was already prepped. And Mazharul Islam, who was a student at Yale University. And Mazharul Islam initially reached out to Alvar Aalto. But Aalto, what happened the night before, according to legends, that he got drunk and he missed his flight to Islamabad and lost that opportunity. Then he went to Le Corbusier. Corbusier said, I'm already too busy designing Chandigarh. I don't have the time. Then he came to Louis Khan. And Louis Khan, when he picked up the phone, he said, when can I start? And that was typically Louis Khan. So when Louis Khan came to the subcontinent, he was really well prepared. And he was a very sensitive sort of an individual who really took interest in the local culture. And he became very friendly and with the local people. Even, he was essentially from Estonia and American, but coming across to 10,000 miles, but he adapted very quickly. That's one part, both in terms of mentally, and in fact, people have commented that how could he imagine, because he came from a very poor background. He more or less lived in a ghetto. So because he could relate to the people of Bangladesh, poor people, dire situation. And that's the reason he wanted to make the monument for the people. And this democratic institution, the parliamentary complex, became a symbol of Bangladeshi freedom struggle. That became very important because it was natural extension. Within that, what he did, when he dug the lake, what happens in a Bengali context, they call pukur, pond. And one of the ways to deal with the weather is essentially you create a pond, and once you dig that, excavate the earth, you create a mound. On top of the mound, you build that. He did exactly the same thing here. Then he inlaid it with marble. Again, Islamic connection. He's bringing in Buddhist connection, Islamic connection. He's bringing in waterways. Bangladesh is surrounded by 700 rivers, so water bodies. So all of that. So they're simultaneously localizing and universal art form, because he's also deeply admires Roman architecture. Pantheon was his favorite building. And he's bringing in, and he saw that visually. And so these are kind of architectural conversation he's having while he's designing Dhaka.
I had no idea about his background, but that's really interesting that he kind of identified with the commoner. But also that he thought that the built environment affects social behavior, and that he mentored, you mentioned that briefly, but do speak about that, scores of artisans and laborers and masons, across this massive period of time that he was building National Assembly, 12 years until he passed away in 1974. So this is architectural sociology, again, very rooted in the here and now and regional reality. Can you speak about that?
So I was having conversation with Henry Wilcox, the project director or the project architect. He was responsible for completion of the project. And he told me that every square inch of that complex 2,000 acres of land, all the buildings, hospitals, parliamentary complex, ministers, hospital, gymnasium, and so on and so forth. Every square inch was actually created by human hands, touched by human hands. Now, that to a subcontinental is understandable. But when you say that to someone from the West, that's very remote. It's truly spectacular. So there were 2,000 people working there. While they're working there, being recruited. As they're recruited, because you have Dubai is coming up, more or less same time. Then you have Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, and the whole range of Middle Eastern countries. And then the next generation, you have Singapore. When you see that, they were all built by subcontinental builders. All the workers were from this part of the world. And they're truly a human monument to what they could do, these incredible structures. But they're faceless people who are out there. But Louis Kahn wanted to celebrate those folks. And those people were living there. And he made it easy so that as they were being taught and they were being recruited, they're being replaced by new villagers coming in.
That's also true, Atul, of what we see in Bombay, handwork, which India is, of course, phenomenally good at. You tell me we're seeing less and less of that now, and I'd like you to speak about that. But also that in Bombay, it was... So Art Deco is essentially defined by the promise of the machine age. And you had technological innovations going on the interwar years, right? We're using new industrial materials, concrete, steel, early plastics like bakelite. So RCC, that's making construction faster and mass production as possible. And then in the middle of all this, there is this irony of the handmade, the touch, which we're seeing across Asmara, Mumbai and Dhaka. What do you think this contradiction was a response to? And tell us what you were telling me earlier about the loss of this handiwork now.
Yeah, actually, that's very interesting because we run a small repair and restoration practice, and we've been now working on almost 13 buildings. And a common refrain is that the contractor says we can't replicate this kind of craftsmanship, and it's in civil work, it's in plaster work. We even had a simple cantilever where we had an eyebrow that extended 4 feet, and he said, at best, I can do 2 feet. So take it or leave it. So, there's a loss at such a basic fundamental form. Forget decorative material, but even in terms of civil work for the older buildings.
Carfuel is 18 feet, the canopy, I think.
Carfuel, I don't know how many feet exactly, but yeah.
Definitely more than 4.
Yes. And I was, when Sean showed the picture of the petrol station, the Fiat one, I did remember Carfuel, and we have our own mini version of the Fiat, which, for those of you who haven't been, please go to Ballard Estate and see Carfuel. It is a remarkable piece of modern architecture done by G.B. Mahatre. And while its canopy may not be as magnificent as what we saw earlier, but it's still worth a look. I think the other very interesting design element, Tinaz, is that Bombay's architecture was also climate responsive. So there was a huge focus on the fact that we need to create quality of life that's also built in a manner that's responsive to the environment, and not the way we design buildings today, where we say, oh, it's very hot, of course, we'll air condition the whole thing. If you notice, Bombay is a city that has a north-south axis, but every building along the sea will have its balconies facing the west. That's not by chance, that's by design, right? So every breath of fresh air, as Claude Batley used to say, should be captured so that there's cross ventilation. And Naveen will know how comfortable it was to live at the Oval for how long before air conditioning became a necessity. You had cool terrazzo flooring, you had balconies. The whole concept of a balcony originated not partly as a design form, but also because it enabled you to sit outside and enjoy the sea breeze or the sunset. And as you mentioned, reinforced cement concrete, which really allowed the style to explode across the city almost in just barely 20 years.
Khan was also, I mean, his architecture was also climate responsive. Sean, I've been intrigued by your argument that I spoke to you about this yesterday, that localizing need not necessarily refer to the use of local materials or relying on regional aesthetic sensibilities. And Eritrea and Asmara in particular is unique because the Italian colonial identity expressed through rationalism, fusionism, deco, it stands intact and in this crazy focused concentration that you don't find anywhere else. But you say that this colonial project had its limitations because the architecture was responding to the realities of Eritrea at the time, and how the people were appropriating and using these spaces. Can you explain this with an example?
Thank you. I mean, what's intriguing about the Italian colonial project is that it's a short-lived one, first of all, and the forms that are being considered or used, especially in the colonies, are by a much younger group of architects who didn't necessarily want to join the fascist party after 22. And so they would go to the colonies because they could actually maybe experiment or think about architecture in a different way. Whereas on the Italian peninsula in particular, only a small group of architects were working in the rationalist way, right? They were very much a part of the party. The work that they were doing was to be reflective of the party. So you have in a case of Asmara in Eritrea, and to a certain extent in Libya as well, you have this hybridization of, say, modernist or international style form being merged with a more, say, indigenous form. And the indigenous form would be, in the case of that gateway, for instance, it's a very specific technique only found, or construction technique only found in Eritrea. So they were doing that very, very purposefully. On the other hand, earlier in the say Eritrea's Italian identity, you had far more a building that was very Italian. So this neo-Romanesque, this very like the cathedral, that's all still very much present. And as the political winds change, architecture changes, like anywhere, right? And as ideas around progress or modernity change, so too did the architectural forms take place. And so for me, at least, what you can see is not only you could see the political and the social transformation happening, but the aesthetics and the ways in which the city was being imagined started changing as well.
I'm going to have my last question go to Sean again, and then we can check if the audience wants to chat with you guys. So unlike in the building of Art Deco in Bombay, where the patrons, the architects, the engineers, the artists, laborers were all Indian and shunning colonial architecture and the baggage associated with it and trying to express their unique identity because nationalism and independence was, around the corner. In Eritrea, while building this fascist sort of ideology through architecture, Eritreans weren't able to express themselves in the design process or access most of it because of racial segregation. And yet, when the Italian defeat in 41 and then independence from Ethiopia in 93, the Eritreans, they chose to retain these structures and architecture as a symbol of resilience, as opposed to sort of tear down this symbol of subjugation, like you see in protests and riots across the world. How did this journey happen? How do you see architecture play a part in this journey from oppression to expression?
I mean, I think we could look at this in the broad view and imagine that modernisms, plural, modernisms, whether they're embedded within art or in architectural practice, were very much related always to the spaces in which these forms, these expressions were being built and imagined and made. I've been to Bangladesh many times, and to think about the work of Musrul Islam, for instance, that Sundaram mentioned, I mean, he's very much invested in the independence movement, yet building within forms that are specific to Bengal and to modernism. In the Italian colonial space or in Italian modern space, not only do you have modern artists looking at the colonial arena, but you have Eritrean artists coming to Italy, being put on display, literally and figuratively, as expressions of the transformation that modernism can happen. So it's a very particular relay, as I was trying to explain, that the colony becomes the mirror, but the mirror is also speaking back to us, speaking back to the power. And I think that when we look at architecture, especially in this period of the 1920s and 1930s, but until today, architecture is fundamentally an expression of power. Economic, social, political, it's power, right? So when we think of power, we have to ask who is building it, but for whom are we building it? And that's that mediation. That's that mediation between, say, the oppression, if you will, and the expression.
Architecture as power. I hadn't thought of that. I'll give that a thought. If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to share a question with Sean, Atul, or Sundaram, go right ahead. Get a mic. Can we get a mic to her? Hi, thank you for this amazing session. And as we talk about localization, I wanted to put forward this question to all of you. Like, where does the word vernacular stand in your vocabulary? Like, it's just something that I've always been thinking about in terms of visual culture and architecture and art. So, just curious about that. And does localizing also marginalize the indigenous, local, or vernacular? Who'd like to take that, Atul? Oh, Sean.
Well, I think, in at least in Bombay, it's fairly visible and visual for you to see in the representation of vernacular, as you must have seen in my slides. And it encompasses everything, right? It's community, faith, religion, and that in itself lends itself to a certain multiculturality, which is very representative of Bombay, and which then extends to a very unique cosmopolitanism too. I'm not sure how, if Sean would like to add to that in terms of what he's seen.
It's incredibly important. First of all, I think that we have this conversation not only with architecture, but also with art. I just finished an exhibition at the NMACC where I very specifically wanted to ally so-called indigenous artists with modern and contemporary artists, because indigenous artists are modern and contemporary artists. And this separation, if you will, the separation is a false dichotomy, because indigeneity is a question of identity. It's a question of context. It's a question of locality, of course, but it's also one in which these forms of power start to challenge or transform or to even extract from, say, the indigenous context in order to relay forms of power as well, right? So the colonial context, wherever you are in the world, is one of extraction of indigenous knowledge. And what we're learning, and I think what we're seeing, especially within the art universe, is that indigenous artists have so much more to share and should be seen more on multiple levels. But in the architecture world, we're only starting to see this exploration of materiality in particular as a form of say, reimagining indigenous practice. Yet, even that becomes a form of extraction, right? So I think it's important within the historical conversation that when we speak of indigeneity, when we speak of vernacular, whose vernacular? Is it a Western European notion of vernacular, or is it an Eritrean form of vernacular? And the interviews that I would do in Asmara, and to your question, actually, your last question, Tinaz, most people in Eritrea speak Italian and Tigrinya, which is the national language, but they can speak both, and they occupy that space, right? So I think it's important that when we speak of indigenous practice, of praxis and rhetoric, etc., we also have to think about from whose perspective are we speaking and why.
Anyone else? Otherwise, we can wrap up the session. Thank you. Thank you, Sean, Atul, and Sundaram for this very insightful conversation and making the time for this. Thank you, Minal and Art Mumbai.